This time on Poll Hub, how secure are American elections? Since the 2016 elections, there have been a lot of stories about possible voting irregularities, lots about election security holes, and experts have had their say. But what do voters think? Well, we've got some answers from a new NPR Marist poll, and why it might sound like a great idea to poll registered voters. But, well, it's not. Our poll director has some thoughts on that, and we're going to talk about that as well. Let's get started. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
We do a lot of polls about and ask a lot of questions, and especially in political seasons, we ask a lot of questions about who are you supporting in an election. But we don't often ask, what about the election itself? Do you trust the security of it? And it probably wasn't a question we've even thought of asking, a decade ago or not very often. But it's become a very major issue and top of mind for a lot of people. And so in our latest poll with NPR, we asked a lot of questions about that. And to discuss that and dig in, we have one of the political editors at NPR, Brett Neely, with us, who we worked with on this poll. Brett, welcome.
Hi, nice to be here.
So let's start kind of at the beginning. Is there a concern among voters that their votes don't count, won't count, could be hacked? What did we see in the broadest sense about that?
I think the thing that was really interesting to me was that there was a lot of concern from voters that their vote wouldn't count. They wouldn't be counted accurately. It was close to half of all voters, if I recall, didn't believe their votes were going to be counted accurately. And then there were even larger issues, around 40% of voters didn't think that elections were conducted very fairly. So, I came out of reading those results feeling a little bit shaken about what voters think about our democracy and how it operates.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was a telling story about why people almost feel backed into a corner. Coming off of 2016, I was struck by the fact that people were not saying, like about 4 in 10, like we're not even prepared, having all the noise that's been going on about that people not only are concerned about the things you're talking about, but they don't necessarily think that we're prepared coming up for the midterms.
Now, you've been following the election process for NPR for some time and speaking to a lot of experts about election security. And I know when we were talking a little bit about, what is it that we should actually ask people and what aspects of the process should we talk about? Could you tell us a little bit about the thoughts behind doing a project like this on election security, at NPR, and what are some of the things that you were hearing from experts and how we put these questions together?
Yeah, I think that a lot of this is just not something that the public gets asked about a lot. And I think that voting is one of those background level activities that people do when they think about politics. It's usually for most people something that takes a few minutes of their time, maybe once or twice a year, and you kind of expect everything to work. But we are very aware of the vulnerabilities that were exposed after the 2016 elections. And those vulnerabilities, we learned that, a lot of state election systems aren't terribly well secured. We've been aware for a somewhat longer time that some of the machines that are used to record votes are not all that secure, but the events of 2016 really reminded us and put that back in the forefront. But we're also just aware that there are a lot of inequities in voting, especially in terms of areas that are wealthier and poorer, and especially the experience for African Americans and non-white voters.
One of the things that stood out to me was when we asked about whether they thought it was domestic problems or foreign problems, that by far and away most people thought domestic. But then you bring up Russia and wait, everybody's mind changes on this. when you think about that, and then you think about the fact that no expert, maybe the experts you talked to, maybe you found some that said different, but by and large, most of the experts have said there's no real credible evidence that there's been any significant amounts of fraud. In the same way that there's been no credible arguments or evidence that there's a lot of voter fraud among people going to the polls who aren't registered or illegal, immigrants, things like that. Is there more of a concern here than there is a story, do you think?
Yeah, I think that there's an echo chamber effect, both that, over the last year and a half, NPR and lots of other outlets, we have recorded a lot. We've reported a lot on, on these security issues, and I think that people who maybe aren't as fully plugged in with the coverage can sometimes take from that means that there's actual hacking of the vote counting systems. But I think there's a parallel effect, as you point out, with the talk of voter fraud. I mean, in any given election, there's been a lot of academic and statistical research that suggests, we're in the 0.1, 0.01 or smaller range of percent range of votes that may have been fraudulently cast. In any individual race, it may be in the low single digits, and not even necessarily fraudulently. It's a lot of cases of people not being aware if they're citizens or not, or of accidentally casting votes in the wrong jurisdiction.
And that's not even, you're not talking about low single digits percentages. That's low single digits
votes. Right. No, I was saying cumulatively over the entire country, over hundreds of millions of votes cast in the entire country. Yeah, we got these low numbers. And but there has been a very powerful campaign to tighten voting laws that has been predicated on the notion of telling people that, voter fraud is a much more common and frequent occurrence. And so, they've been getting that message in some circles for many years now. And so they assume that is much more common. And in the same way that they may be a little bit concerned about, the voting the voting tallies being changed on Election Day.
As they say in the world of Twitter sphere, I'm old enough to remember the 2000 election. And of course, that was one that taught us a whole lot about how voting takes place. In Florida, up until that point, Americans thought the way they voted was the way everybody voted. And then you found out that there were all these hanging chads and all these other things. And I know Jay was down there covering that for WNBC, the whole Florida debacle, really. And then we come back now after 2016, and we're such a long time from 2000, and then we're revisiting some of the very same issues of, just are we getting a fair count? And as I was saying before, and we were talking about the lack of preparation, that anything has been done to stop it from recurring, the Russian concern. I guess one of the findings that jumped out at me on this was this sense that we should have some paper ballot trail, like maybe nothing else is going to happen. The president may not be doing much. Congress may be not doing much, but maybe a paper trail would at least provide some added security to this. That was how I reacted to the data in terms of, is there any light at the end of the tunnel on this?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's actually one of the things that really depressed me, to be honest about this, was how so much of the was viewed through a partisan lens, and that if you were a Democrat, if you weren't white, if you were a woman, you were much more likely to think that elections weren't fair. If you're a Republican voter, you think elections are fair because your candidate won in 2016, and that one of the few areas where there was really bipartisan overwhelming consensus was, we should really move away from electronic voting machines and we should really go to paper ballots. And it sort of felt like, perhaps the coverage that we've done has at least, broken through there, and that there really is a consensus in the voting world and the cybersecurity world that, better to rely on something that you can audit as much as possible.
Sure, and the difference that we saw this time, too, was that if there is some kind of fraud or there's some perception that something has tainted the election process. It's interesting, there's a partisan twist to that too, and people are more likely to think that that is going to help the Republicans this time. Whereas I think we also compared this and asked a question that had been asked by Fox News back in 2008, and it was the Democrats that people thought were going to benefit from any kind of fraud. I mean, do we have really a perception problem here? And I guess we've done a lot of surveys too with you guys on just how people feel about institutions in this country. And so are we really seeing in this idea of election fraud just another undermining of a very important, but just another institution in our democracy?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I absolutely agree. And I mean, I would argue that it goes even beyond the institutions. It goes to the the fabric of reality, if I may sound a little metaphysical, because you ask people's views on the economy, and Republicans have a very different story to tell about how the economy is doing than Democrats do, and they really start diverging, around January 2017 when there's a changeover in power, I mean, we've been headed in this direction, I feel like, for a good 20 odd years, but it's a whole new world.
Yeah.
When your views on institutions and the outcomes of elections and even how the economy is doing is entirely shaped by whether you vote for a Democrat or a Republican.
Now, one of the things is perception, but one finding that we did have in this particular poll is that we did see a difference, not just in perception, but in experience when people do go to the polls based on race. And African American voters and Latino voters really talking about having problems when they go to the polls, much more so than white voters. So we had over 1/4 of people of color tell us that they have waited a very long time at their voting place in order to vote, compared to about 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 white Americans. We also found on a number of different issues having to do with being questioned about your ID, whether you've been questioned or told that you haven't been registered, and just in general having difficulty voting, that people of color do say that they have had much more difficulty.
But then people turn around and say, well, maybe we should have photo IDs, and that's one of the reforms. And then we found out in this survey that 1 in 10 African Americans don't have a photo ID, a government photo ID. So that reform, again, will have a discriminatory impact on who is voting or not.
So do you think the real story here, or not the real story, but the thing that we maybe can take away from this that we didn't think about going in is that we were asking about election security, but what we really come away with is that voting, not necessarily election security, but voting is a very disparate experience depending on the color of your skin, the region that you live in, your economic status. Is that a fair takeaway, you think?
Absolutely. And to some extent, we've always known that because, we're a country where voting is something that's done at the local level. We have thousands of different jurisdictions that do voting, 50 states that all have different laws. And one of the things, and this is a story that I'm really hoping that we can get on the air before November, is that and one of the reasons for some of the differences that we're talking about in terms of these experiences with voting is that a place that is poorer is likely to have more poor quality equipment, for example, that's more susceptible to breakdowns on election day, which will contribute to longer lines. And so sometimes there are factors that aren't directly to do with discriminatory behavior and discriminatory intent, but have to do with a long history in our country of discrimination and lack of opportunity that can carry through and really discourage participation in the voting process.
Yeah, and I think there was a sense in the poll also that from the data that someone has to step up because people don't feel that this is going on. people told us that they feel that the responsibility ultimately is at the federal level, but then they say they don't have any confidence or not a lot of confidence in the federal level to do something. So a little bit of a catch-22 coming into the data. But I want to thank you very much, not only for joining us today, but also for initiating this project with us, because I think it was really a very valuable one for us. So I want to thank you very much for the suggestion and also for your participation today.
Oh, thank you. I really, really enjoyed working with you, and I hope we can continue to work together on this because I think it's a fascinating subject that doesn't really get enough attention.
So we've been talking a lot about different types of polls this election season, and we focus a lot on what the population or what the group of people that the poll is talking about, whether it's registered voters or likely voters. But one of the other things that we've noticed has really changed this election cycle is how people and how pollsters, rather, are getting the phone numbers and selecting the individuals to participate in a poll. And the reason why I think, everybody's kind of looking for a quicker way, a less expensive way of trying to talk to voters. And one of the ways that people have found is a little bit less expensive and a little easier is to look at registered base sampling, which means going to the voter lists and identifying those people who are already registered and then talking to those individuals in the survey.
Which seems like it would make sense. I mean, they're voters. Why not talk to voters, right?
Well, and I was going to say, before we even get to that point, that this is not the way we do it. So that
that's why we're talking
we use
about
random probability-based samples, and we find that that's a much better way of doing it.
Oh, now you're talking dirty, Lee.
Well,
random probability samples.
Okay, so we
gotta
call
strut our stuff,
We get phone numbers. We call. Could be a fax machine.
Yes.
Could be human. Who knows? That's how you get a right.
It's a list. It's a list of phone numbers. We draw our phone numbers, both mobile phone numbers and landline numbers, from an entire list called a sampling frame. If we want to talk polling, polling jargon. And so all Americans, anybody who has a cell phone or a landline, has an opportunity of being in that sample.
But this other type is, let's not start with everybody. Let's make it a little less expensive by starting with registered.
And so then the
But
question
also,
becomes, why is that not working?
it allows you to start with households and individuals.
Instead
one
of
of the
fax
things,
machines and businesses,
as you pointed out, we get a lot of numbers, and most of the numbers that we dial are not even real numbers, or they're connected to something that isn't a real person.
Now, one of the things we saw last week, we talked about the New York Times Siena kind of real time.
Oh, hold on.
all
Let me
right.
just talk about what the
Okay.
difference is
All
here,
right.
and
I'll
what
be good.
one of the issues is. So, getting phone numbers from registration lists and identifying households and people who are registered is on the kind of face of it a good idea, because you're going right to the source. But the problem with these lists is the fact that they aren't great lists. They do have names, they do have households, and they have addresses. So if you wanted to do what's called an address-based sample, that might be something pretty valuable, because every single person on that list has an address.
So if you're doing a poll of a congressional district where the lines cross around and through and above counties, this might be something that you would
and you wanted to
logically
knock
turn
on
to.
their door, or you wanted to send them some mail, and were able to
If you're
follow
a
up.
campaign, it makes sense.
And exactly.
So we have actual results, though, because there was an election here in New York State, and we had a governor on the ballot, we had attorney general candidates on the ballot, and we had a poll that was done just before that used RBS,
Yes.
right? And what happened?
Well, it was done by Siena, and we were talking about last week about their experiment they're doing with congressional districts around the country and showing just how many people they're dialing to get voters, and that's using this way. So you can imagine when we're doing it our way, we're even dialing more people. But in this project...
Well, more numbers.
More numbers. But in this project that they particularly did about New York State, I mean, one of the things we found in the numbers was, and it may be because of the way they're drawing the sample, it may have not been, but they overstated the margin that Cuomo had by about 10 points. In terms of the Attorney General's race, they actually had Maloney 1 point ahead, of.
Well, they actually got that number right. He was
Yes,
just in
the
third
25.
place.
The 25 was right. He got 25, but he finished third, way down from Tish James, who won. And the same thing with the race for lieutenant governor.
Yeah, so let's go back to the AG race, just
yeah.
so people understand. This is a Democratic primary in the state of New York. We had a infamous AG who left office because of some problems, and so we have this is a surprise. And there were four people running in it. Letitia James, who's a New York City official; Zephyr Teachout, who has run in other statewide races here before; Sean Patrick Maloney, who's a sitting congressman in the Hudson Valley. In fact, we're in his district right here in Poughkeepsie, and Leisha Eve, who is the daughter of a famous politician, or what he is no longer. I don't believe is Arthur Eve? No, Arthur Eve has passed away. Anyway, he was a famous politician. The Siena Research had Maloney winning that race, and as it turned out, they got his percentage right, but they missed Teachout and Tish James beating him handily. In
By
fact,
15 points.
Tish James got 39% of the vote. They had her at 24%. And what we're suggesting is that by doing this based on a registered voter list, they might have missed something. Why is that? You're the director of this poll. You know this stuff inside out. So, Barbara, why would that possibly be one of the causes?
Because the lists, the registration lists, are put together by local officials, state officials, and the coordination among those different jurisdictions is not comparable around a state and also across states. So what that means is that the lists are incomplete. The only information that is really kept is information about the person's name and where they live. All the other information is then garnered from other sources. So if you want to find a phone number, most people actually, when they register to vote, don't share their phone number, and they certainly don't share their cell phone number. So what we find when we're examining these lists is that there's quite a gap between the information that we need to contact people for a survey, either an email or a cell phone or a landline number, and who's registered.
Isn't it also a timeliness issue, though? In that whenever this RBS list is gotten together, there are people who are continuing to register, and the more enthusiasm there is in election year, and we have
and it may be partisan based.
Right. We have seen super enthusiasm this election year. We've seen large registration movements in one direction that may not be reflected in these lists
Less
yet,
of a problem in New York because of the fact that you can't register close to an election or a primary in New York. But, there was another example. This isn't a Siena problem, and this is not a New York problem, but there was an interesting case of recently in the Tennessee general election polls.
This is for
On
U.S.
the
Senate.
Yes.
Right. The primaries are out of the way,
yeah.
and it's Phil Bredesen, who is a popular
Yes,
ex-governor,
so
and Martha
we pulled that with
Blackburn,
NBC, and
who's a
Bredesen,
congresswoman.
and we pulled that with NBC, and Bredesen was up 2 points over Blackburn. CNN, doing a similar way of drawing the sample, had Bredesen up by 5, and then Fox News, which is a real poll, as we've talked about on this program
And a good
other
poll.
times, a good poll, but they do it the other way.
Well, they're now doing it with registered base sampling.
And they had Blackburn up by 3. Now, those aren't big differences in the numbers, 2, 5, and 3.
Well, there's a big
but editorially,
editorial.
the first 2 polls have one person winning, and the other poll has the other
So
person
the election's
winning.
not going to be held today, so we actually don't know
Yeah, sure,
if
which
any
is-
of these polls
yes.
are accurate. They may all be wrong, but if the election were held today and Blackburn lost and didn't win like the Fox poll suggesting, you're suggesting that at least part of that has to do with the fact that they're working off of a registered voter list and things have changed and the registered voter list may have missed people, and
That's
it's
right.
better to do a sample to be talking to everybody possible in the universe, which is the phones, as opposed to a list of supposed registered voters.
And
Yeah,
in
and I think that's
2016,
essentially
in
correct.
2016, the Monmouth poll, Patrick Murray did a lot of RBS sampling of states around the country, and sometimes it works because the states have very up-to-date lists and they're able to put together contact information, telephone numbers for individuals, and sometimes it's a big miss.
I guess the bottom line for this is I think it's important to have, when you look in the fine print, see how the survey was done, see who did the sample, and even who paid for the poll. Sometimes that's become issue with partisan polls and commission polls showing up. There was one in New York State that had the Republican candidate only 3 points behind Andrew Cuomo, but it was paid for by a political party. So you have to sort of be the buyer.
Which
beware of
political
that.
party? The
It
Democrats?
was the Reform Party in that case.
Oh, the Reform Party.
Yes.
That's another
You didn't think
story
it was the
for
Democrats.
another day. And maybe we'll go 3 in a row. Next week, we'll mention Siena Poll again. We'll do 3 in a row with our friends upstate.
I don't want to start a poll war here exactly. We were very complimentary of what they were doing
For transparency.
in transparency for last week, and then today we weren't as in love.
Just raising some questions. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll here at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Mary Griffith, our executive producer, pointing fingers right now. Come on, wrap this up. Come on, people. Penny Marples is our editor.
And we'd also like to thank the Roper Center Archives at Cornell University, who provide us with the ability to look back in time at survey questions that have been asked, and we can do all kinds of trend stuff. And there's some other stuff I've been spotting coming by, and I think maybe next program or two we're going to throw in some oldies but goodies that come out of the Roper Center.
And please send your comments to pollhub@marist.edu or reach out on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter or Marist Poll on Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe.
Catch you next time.